I found my roommate on Craigslist. She said she was my age. She moved in within a week. 5 nights later, I realized she was standing outside my bedroom door in the dark, watching me. By the time the police arrived, she had vanished, and none of the information she gave me about herself was real. In 2015, when I was 23 years old, I used Craigslist to find a roommate to share my apartment with. Back then, using Craigslist for things like finding roommates was pretty normal. There weren't many other platforms for it, and it wasn't nearly as abused as it is now. I posted a listing with photos of my place and specified that I was looking for someone preferably around my age. A few days later, I got a response from a woman named Hannah. She said she was also 23 and still in college. From our phone conversations, she seemed really similar to me. We had overlapping schedules, similar routines, and she seemed calm and easy to live with. I honestly felt relieved. Finding a stranger to move into your home always feels like a gamble, but she didn't give me any obvious red flags. When Hannah came by to tour the apartment, everything felt normal. She liked the place, agreed on the rent, and within a week, she had moved in. One thing I did notice, though, was that she didn't really look her age. She was a little taller than me and had a more mature, almost older look. Not in a bad way, just something about her face and posture felt off. I brushed it off. Some people just look older than they are. The first few days were uneventful. We barely crossed paths. I had work, she had college and a part-time job. We were both busy, still getting used to living with someone new. It was the 5th night after she moved in that something happened. I got home around 10 p.m. As soon as I opened the front door, I heard hurried footsteps rushing down the hallway, and then a door slammed shut. It startled me. I dropped my bag and walked toward the hallway. Hannah's bedroom door was closed and the light was on, but my bedroom door was open. I knew I had closed it before I left. The idea that she might have gone into my room immediately made me uncomfortable. I went inside and looked around. Nothing seemed moved. Nothing looked touched. Still, the feeling lingered. I closed the door behind me and tried to forget about it. I spent the next hour watching TV in my room. I didn't hear Hannah move or make any noise at all, so I assumed she'd gone to bed early like she mentioned she usually did. At some point, I glanced toward my door out of habit. That's when I saw the shadow. There was a dark shape under the crack of the doorway. Someone was standing there. Not moving, just standing. I froze, staring at it, my brain struggling to catch up to what I was seeing. How long had she been there? "Hannah?" I called out. The shadow didn't move. "Hannah, are you out there?" Several seconds passed. Then, slowly, the shadow shifted away from the door. I heard her walk down the hallway, and a moment later, her bedroom door slammed shut. My heart was pounding. I locked my door that night and stayed up much later than usual, replaying it over and over in my head. The next morning, I casually asked her about it in the kitchen. She smiled and said everything was fine. Nothing else. No explanation. No confusion. Just fine. The following night, I got home around the same time. The apartment was dark. I assumed she was already asleep. I quietly went into my room and closed the door. After a FaceTime call with a friend, I took a shower. At one point, I thought I heard movement outside my room, but when I listened, it was quiet. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the door to the hallway was open. I was almost certain I'd closed it earlier. I locked it this time, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Why would she open my door? Why would she stand there in silence? Later that night, I fell asleep. When I woke up, the room was pitch black. The door was cracked open. I knew I had locked it. I hadn't heard it open. I stared at the darkness beyond the crack, feeling that sick, crawling sensation of being watched. Then I saw her. She was standing in the corner of my room near my wardrobe. Not moving, just staring at me. Her face was blank, empty, like she wasn't really seeing me, just looking through me. She took a step forward, then another. Suddenly, she sprinted out of the room and slammed her bedroom door. I didn't wait. I grabbed my phone and keys and ran out of the apartment, got into my car, and drove off before calling the police. By the time they arrived, Hannah was gone. Her room was nearly empty, and none of the information she gave me was real. Next story. I didn't think I had anything to fear living with 3 other guys. We were all broke, all fresh out of college, all just trying to figure life out. But for the last 3 months I lived in that house, it was just me and him. And the night he asked me to follow him into the woods, I realized I might not have made it back alive. This happened in my early 20s. Back then, I lived in a small house with 3 other guys. We hadn't really known each other before moving in together, but we'd gone to the same college and graduated around the same time. All of us were desperate for somewhere affordable to live, so we ended up renting a small house on the rural outskirts of the city. Splitting the rent 4 ways was the only reason we could afford it. Anything closer to the city was way too expensive. For the first 9 months, everything felt normal. We weren't close friends, but we got along fine. Then, almost overnight, 2 of the guys decided to move out. That left just me and KJ. Out of the 3, KJ was the one I knew the least. He was always gone, always working late, or getting home long after midnight, or just keeping to himself. He never really hung out with us, never joined in on anything. So, of course, it had to be the other 2 who left. Now the rent was split in half instead of 4 ways. There was no way either of us could afford that for long. We agreed that once the lease ended in 3 months, we'd go our separate ways and leave the house behind. But during that first month alone with KJ, something started to feel off. On my days off, I'd be home all day and night by myself. The house felt too quiet, empty. It was strange how rarely I saw him, considering he only worked part-time in the mornings. I assumed he must have been out with friends every night. That was the easiest explanation. Then one night I stayed up later than usual. It was around 1 a.m. when headlights swept across my bedroom wall. I heard tires crunch over the gravel driveway, then the front door open. For some reason, I decided to get up and say hi. Things already felt distant and awkward between us, and I didn't want it to get worse. I opened my bedroom door and immediately heard his footsteps rushing down the hallway. When I leaned out, he flinched hard, like I'd caught him doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. The hallway lights were off, so I couldn't see his face clearly, but what I could see made my stomach tighten. His eyes were wide. His body was frozen. He stood just outside his bedroom door, staring at me in the dark. "What's up, KJ? Just checking in," I said, trying to break the silence. He didn't respond right away. He just stood there, eyes locked on me, breathing shallow and fast. "I'm good," he finally muttered. The silence that followed felt heavy, uncomfortable. I nodded awkwardly and stepped back into my room, closing the door behind me. That interaction didn't make things less awkward. It made them worse. After a minute or 2, curiosity got the better of me. I quietly opened my door again and walked down the hallway, telling myself I was just going to pass by his room and listen for a second. Nothing more. But as I neared his door, I heard frantic movement inside. Drawers opening and slamming shut, something being dropped, then more shuffling, fast and chaotic. I stopped walking. The sounds were so erratic that I leaned in slightly, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My chest felt tight. My instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. Then suddenly, everything went silent. The noise stopped so abruptly it was like someone had hit a mute button. I stood there, frozen, my heart thudding in my ears. Every second that passed made my skin crawl more. I was just about to back away, when the door swung open. KJ stood in the doorway. Same wide eyes, same stiff posture, staring directly at me. I panicked, trying to cover myself. "I was just heading to the kitchen," I said quickly. "You want anything?" He quietly muttered no. Then he closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood grain of his door. my pulse racing. Whatever was going on with him, it wasn't normal. I went to the kitchen like I'd said, then returned to my room. The house stayed quiet for the rest of the night. Over the next several days, I couldn't stop paying attention to KJ. I stayed awake until I heard him come home. I couldn't fall asleep until I knew he was in his room. Every time I saw him, he looked worse. His eyes were restless, darting around constantly. He barely spoke. When he did, it was only a word or two before rushing back into his room. He didn't look tired. He looked wired. Then one night, as I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, there was a knock on my door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hadn't heard him walk down the hallway at all. I opened the door slowly. KJ stood there, eyes twitchy, a strange half-smile on his face. He said he'd just gotten home and thought he dropped his wallet somewhere out in the driveway. He asked if I had a flashlight and could help him look for it real quick. The request felt off. He'd never asked me for help with anything before, ever, but I was tired, and part of me hoped this was a normal interaction, maybe a way to reset whatever weird tension had built up between us. So I grabbed a flashlight and followed him outside. He tried to make small talk as we walked down the gravel driveway, asking about work, about random things that didn't matter. But I noticed his car was parked way farther down than usual, almost at the very end of the driveway. We reached his car. There was nothing on the ground. Then he kept walking, leading me away from the driveway, toward the woods. I stopped. "What are we doing?" I asked. He hesitated, then said he'd gone for a short walk earlier and might have dropped his wallet out here. I didn't believe him. He kept trying to guide me deeper into the trees. Every time I suggested we turn back, he tried to convince me to keep going. My nerves started screaming. "Here," I said, holding the flashlight out to him. "You take it. I'm heading back. I've got to be up early." He didn't take the flashlight. His smile disappeared. The disappointment in his eyes shifted into something darker, something angry. He didn't say a word. The tension felt unbearable. I turned around and walked away. As I reached the edge of the woods, I looked back. KJ was still standing there, watching me. I packed that night, didn't sleep, left in the morning. Even years later, I never heard from him again. But I'm convinced, whatever he wanted to do in those woods that night, I wasn't meant to come back from it. Next story. I thought the noises in our hallway were just the house settling. That's what I told myself for days, until my roommate asked why I was walking around at 3 in the morning, when I wasn't. I lived with my college roommate Jason for nearly 2 years in a small house just outside the campus we used to go to. We weren't close friends when we first moved in together. We'd only known each other as classmates, and even during college, we never really hung out much. We just happened to graduate around the same time and both needed a cheap place to live, so it made sense to split rent for a while. The house itself was nothing special. Old floors, thin walls, narrow hallways. The kind of place where every step echoed just a little too loudly at night. For the first year, everything was normal. We got along well enough, paid rent on time, and eventually renewed the lease for another year. Nothing strange ever happened back then. At least, not that I noticed. That changed a couple of months after we renewed. One night, after getting home late from work, Jason and I talked for a bit in the living room. Just normal roommate stuff. Then we both went to bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of slow footsteps in the hallway. Not loud, not rushed, just careful, deliberate creaking of floorboards, one after another, moving toward the main area of the house. I rolled over and checked the time. 3 a.m. Half asleep, I assumed it was Jason getting up for water or using the bathroom. The thought barely registered before I rolled over and fell back asleep. In the morning, I was rushing to get to work when Jason opened his door, looking confused and tired. He asked me why I was walking around the house at 3 in the morning. That caught me off guard. I told him I wasn't, and that I thought it was him. We both just stood there for a moment, confused. Then I brushed it off, blaming the old house. Old floors creak. Old houses make noise. That's what I told myself. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same slow footsteps, same steady movement through the hallway. This time, I stayed awake and listened. The sound traveled from one end of the house to the other, then stopped completely. After about 30 seconds of silence, I got up and checked the living room. Jason wasn't there. Nothing was out of place. No doors open, no lights on. Still uneasy, I went back to bed. The next evening, I got home late from work. As I walked down the hallway toward my room, I noticed Jason sitting on the edge of his bed in the corner of his room. The light was on. He was just sitting there, completely still. I called out to him as I passed, but he didn't respond. A few minutes later, when I walked back down the hallway toward the kitchen, his light was off. The room was dark, but he was still sitting there, in the same position, not moving, not responding. That's when the unease really set in. Later that night, the footsteps returned. This time, I watched as something moved beneath my bedroom door, a shadow shifting slowly across the floor. My heart dropped. I texted Jason to ask if he was walking around. He replied, "What do you mean? I'm not home." The hallway was empty when I opened my door, but Jason's bedroom door was wide open. Inside, standing in the center of the room, was a tall man with a thick beard, someone I had never seen before. I didn't hesitate. I ran. The police arrived minutes later, but whoever it was had vanished. No forced entry, no signs of how he'd gotten in. The most disturbing part? Those footsteps I'd been hearing for days weren't Jason. Someone had been inside our house at night, walking through the halls while we slept. And for some reason, he had been sitting on Jason's bed, waiting. Next story. I thought the worst part of living alone was the silence. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing the silence was being managed. I moved to Westfield in late September, the kind of suburb where every porch light matches and the lawns look vacuumed. My new job was in the city, an hour away, and the rental market was brutal. So when I found a tiny one-story house for cheap, I didn't ask too many questions. It had one bedroom, one bathroom, and a narrow hallway that made the whole place feel like a straight line. Front door, living room, hallway, bedroom. Like you could stand at the entrance and see the entire life you were about to live. The landlord, a soft-spoken guy named Ross, handed me the keys and said, "Just one thing, don't mess with the utility closet." "What's in it?" I asked. "Old panel, touchy. We'll handle it if anything acts up." He smiled like it was nothing. I laughed like it was nothing. The closet door was in the hallway, halfway between the living room and the bedroom. White paint, cheap knob, no lock. The kind of door you forget exists until it creaks. The first week, everything was normal. I unpacked, bought a shower curtain, learned which floorboard in the hallway complained if you stepped on it wrong. My routine settled in quick. Work, drive, microwave dinner, TV, bed. And because the neighborhood was so quiet, I started sleeping with a fan on, just to have something in the background. Not because I was scared, just because silence gets heavy when you're the only person making noise. Then the utility closet started making noise too. It began as a soft click at night. Not a knock, not a bang, just a single, polite click, like a plastic switch flipping. The first time I heard it, I sat up in bed and stared at the dark hallway. The fan hummed, the house held its breath, and then nothing. The next night it happened again. Same click, same time, somewhere between 2:40 and 3:10 a.m. I checked my phone like an idiot, as if looking at the time would make it less weird. By the fifth night, I was waiting for it. I'd lie there in the dark, not fully asleep, listening to my own pulse and the soft rotation of the fan. When the click finally came, it felt too close, like it wasn't in the hallway so much as inside the wall. That weekend, I texted Ross, "Hey, utility closet making a clicking sound at night. Is that normal?" He replied 20 minutes later, "Could be the panel cycling." Old house. I can come by Monday. Monday came. Ross didn't. Tuesday came. Ross said he'd try for Thursday. Thursday night, the click came again. But this time, it wasn't alone. It was followed by something else. Something my brain tried to file away as house noise before I could really think about it. A slow, careful creak. Not the random creak of settling wood. A deliberate one. A foot testing a board. I sat up so fast my sheet slid off my shoulder. I turned the fan off, and the silence became immediate and sharp. Another creak. In the hallway. I grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on, aiming it at the doorway. The beam cut into the hall and landed on the utility closet door. It was slightly open. Just an inch. I know it wasn't open when I went to bed. I would have noticed. The hallway was narrow, and that door sat right in your line of sight like an accusation. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The crack of darkness behind the door looked deeper than it should have, like it went farther than a normal closet had any right to. I whispered, "Hello." The house didn't answer. The fan was off, and without it, I could hear everything, my breathing, the faint electrical hum in the walls, the subtle ringing in my ears that shows up when you're scared enough. And then I heard it. A soft exhale. Not mine. It came from the hallway, right by that door. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up, phone light shaking in my hand. I took one step toward the hall and froze, because the utility closet door moved. Not opening, not closing, just shifting, like something behind it adjusted its weight against it. I didn't think. I acted. I backed up, shut my bedroom door, and locked it. My hands were clumsy. I turned my phone volume all the way up and dialed 911 with my thumb hovering over the call button. I waited. Nothing else happened for a full minute. Then I heard the click again. The same polite little click, but now it sounded like it came from inside my bedroom, right at the door. I stared at the knob. The knob didn't turn. It didn't jiggle. But the click came again, and suddenly I realized what it was. A lock. Not my bedroom lock. That one was engaged, and I could feel it, solid. It was the little latch on the hallway side of the utility closet. An old, cheap hook latch I hadn't even noticed before. The kind that makes a tiny metal click when it catches. Someone was closing it. From the outside. My stomach dropped like a stone. Because if someone was closing the latch on the utility closet door from the hallway, that meant they were in the hallway. And if they were in the hallway, they weren't outside my house. They were already inside it. I hit call. The operator answered, and I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out thin. "There's someone in my house," I said. "I think they're in the hallway. I'm in my bedroom with the door locked." The operator asked for my address. I gave it, then added, "They might be in a closet. There's a utility closet in the hallway." "Do you have a weapon?" she asked. "No." "Stay where you are. Don't open the door. Officers are on the way." I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the door like it was going to open by itself. The house was silent again. Too silent. Even the refrigerator hum seemed muted, as if the whole place was trying not to breathe. Then, softly, so softly I wondered if I imagined it, I heard the faintest scrape, wood against wood, right outside my bedroom door, like someone dragging a fingernail down it. The operator kept talking, asking me questions to keep me grounded. I answered automatically, eyes wide, body locked. The scrape stopped. Another minute passed. Then I heard a different sound, slow footsteps moving away from my door, down the hallway, toward the living room, toward the front door. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of the door opening, the deadbolt turning, anything. Instead, I heard the click again, from the hallway, and the footsteps returned, slower. Stopping right outside my bedroom door, the operator asked, "Can you see under the door?" I leaned forward and looked. There was no light under it, no shadow. Then a faint beam appeared, moving low across the floor, like a flashlight aimed downward. It passed my door, continued down the hall, and stopped at the utility closet. The light vanished, and then the closet door opened. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft pull, as if whoever did it knew exactly how to move it without making noise. The click came again. And then, silence. I realized something in that moment that made my skin crawl worse than the footsteps. Whoever was out there wasn't panicking. They weren't rushing. They were comfortable, like the house was theirs. The operator said, "Officers are pulling onto your street." And right on cue, faintly, I heard it. Tires on asphalt, doors closing, distant radios. Real sounds, normal sounds, the outside world returning. But then, from the hallway, came a final noise. A gentle tap. Not on my door, not on the closet, on the wall. 3 times, evenly spaced. Tap, 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 like a signal. Then nothing. When the police arrived, I didn't open my bedroom door until they shouted my name and told me to come out with my hands visible. My knees felt like rubber. The hallway looked normal. Too normal. The utility closet door was closed. The latch was hooked. One officer unhooked it and pulled the door open. And the closet was empty. Not no one hiding, empty. Bare empty. No shelves, no boxes, no panel. Just painted drywall and a dusty floor. Ross hadn't lied about it being old. He'd lied about it being a closet. One of the officers crouched and shined his flashlight along the back wall. He frowned, then knocked lightly on it. It sounded hollow. He pressed his fingers against the seam where the wall met the floor. Then he looked at me and said, "Did you ever go in here?" "No," I whispered. "Landlord told me not to." He nodded once, slow, like that explained something he didn't want to explain out loud. They pulled the baseboard loose. Behind it was a narrow cutout, just enough for fingers. A hidden panel. The officer slid it aside, and cold air breathed out of the space behind it. There was a crawl space. Not the normal kind under a house. This one ran sideways. Along the hallway, along the wall, along my bedroom. A long, narrow void that shouldn't have existed in a house this small. And on the dirt inside it, pressed into the dust like someone had been there recently, were footprints. Not old, not random. Fresh. One officer stood up and said, "We're calling this in. You need to leave tonight." I nodded so hard my neck hurt. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my keys and my phone and my jacket, and I walked out under the flashing blue lights into the cold night air. As I stepped off the porch, I glanced back at my front window, at the straight line of the hallway, visible for a second through the gap in the blinds. And in that dark line, for the briefest moment, I saw movement, a shape withdrawing into the wall, like it had done it 100 times before, like it had practiced being silent, like it knew exactly when to disappear. Ross never answered my calls after that. The listing for the house vanished within a day. The police told me they couldn't find a record of any recent permits, renovations, or even accurate floor plans. Just an old house in a perfect neighborhood, with one extra space that didn't belong. And sometimes, late at night, when my new apartment is quiet, I'll hear a polite little click from somewhere in the wall, and I'll remember the worst part of living alone. Not the silence. The feeling that someone, somewhere, is choosing when you get to have it.